The views and opinions expressed on this show are purely the views and opinions of the person who made them, and do not necessarily reflect or agree with those of the show's commercial sponsors, its radio station affiliates, or internet broadcast platforms. As the restriction on our God-given right to free speech manifests itself throughout the world, we are inspired by Jesus Christ's immortal words, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And we reserve the rights to all our words. Thank you, and now enjoy the show.
To learn who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticise. You are listening to ACH, I'm Andy, your host, and before we start today's show, I'd like to thank George for his recent donation. If you are able to help keep the show on the air, then please go to achshow.com, click the banner at the top, or scroll down on the right hand side and click on one of the books. So that being said, today is Monday, and we're going to do a special show entitled The Rittenhouse Event, Malevolent Hatred Against the White Soul and White Character, with my co-host Maleficus Scott. So let's bring him up right now. Maleficus, are you with me?
Good morning, old boy. Yeah, I'm back again.
Excellent, thank you, Maleficus. Great to have you on board. And we're delighted also to have our regular collaborator, who is also the producer of today's show, Frank Raymond, as our special guest today. So Frank, are you with us?
I am certainly with you, in heart and soul.
Absolutely wonderful to have you on as always. And finally, please keep the prayers coming for Dave Gahari. He continues to make significant progress, but is still on a journey to full recovery, a journey upon which I firmly believe your prayers are contributing greatly too. Okay, sir, now let's hand over to Frank to open up our show entitled The Rittenhouse Event, Malevolent Hatred Against the White Soul and White Character. Frank, where would you like to start us off today?
Well, I start off by saying greetings. Greetings to Andy Hitchcock, and greetings to his maleficent majesty, Maleficus the Malevolent. Bane and terror. Bane and terror of the... Yes, the Malevolent. Bane and terror of the alien hordes, who now infest and seize the lands of Caucasian man and white woman. I should mention, there is a word known as maleficent, M-A-L-E-F-I-C-E-N-T. And it means causing harm or destruction, especially by supernatural means. So I pray that Maleficus will call upon his supernatural powers in conjunction with Andy to free European men and white women from alien rule and alien colonization, from the grim fate of dispossession and genocide. But for today, I say merry meet to you two jolly blades from Sherwood Forest, who walk their forest as outlaws in their own land, just as Robin and his merry men did in ages past. But the revolution is now definitely on the way, and finally, white men and white women will stand up and be counted. That was my greeting to you.
Well met, sir. Well met, sir. To put it in Sherwood terms, well met, my good man.
Who's the sheriff here, Andy?
Well, it is encouraging what you said there, because with all the attacks going on, and we're not talking about the big global, vaccine push, stuff like that, we're seeing people more and more persecuted for things that they've said and being jailed, and so obviously it's time for, we're a peaceful people, but for some reason we've been attacked for decades, if not centuries.
The Saxon, sir, is very patient and very forgiving and forbearing until he's not.
Yes, there's a poem, a Rudyard Kipling poem, I believe, When the Saxon Learned to Hate, or something like that.
Exactly. But you're right, it is a difficult time for whites. For some 70 years, they have been driven downward, steadily downward, impoverished by wars in the Middle East and Afghanistan for the Jew supremacists, gagged and choked and silenced by cruel repressive laws, and a media dominated by their enemies, their borders evaporated, steadily dispossessed of their land, their schools, their every institution, and even their homes through colonization by colored aliens, or just aliens. Anyone who is not white, you have to consider an alien if you're a patriot. Oppressed by their so-called governments, even the supposedly neutral judiciary. Whites have indeed reached the nadir, the lowest point of their humiliation, with the occupation of the US presidency by the loathsome Joe Biden, the most degenerate of lickspittles, a puppet who openly collaborates with the enemies of his people, white people. This man has been anti-white in word and deed for decades, but he feels it's worth it. He owns several palaces. Through his son, his bagman, he scoops up outright bribes, percentages, gifts, commissions, and kickbacks. Old Joe has taken more kickbacks than a horse proctologist. And Americans are told to celebrate the fact that their vice president is a colored person, the infamous Kamala Harris. Never mind that she is a moron with a cackle. She is colored, and that is progress to a better age, an age in which whites will be a tiny minority and will be inferior subjects. The aging lickspittle with dementia and the cackling moron, the presidency of Biden and Harris, more like the presidency of Laurel and Hardy or Dumb and Dumber. Sounds funny, but it's not really funny. They are vindictive and hateful, and instruments of the destruction of white men and Caucasian women. They serve as frontmen and women for the evil lords who have the power to encompass that destruction. And now, with the announcement of the verdict on Kyle Rittenhouse, what did old Joe have to say? The White House, run by Ron Klain, his Jewish chief of staff and proximate handler, issued the statement that old Joe is, quote, angry and concerned, unquote, that Rittenhouse has been acquitted. All can see that this young man, a boy really, was innocent. Yet the shadow lords want his head. He is white, and that makes him guilty. Now that's white privilege. If you want an insight into the scam known as white privilege, read chapter 2 of my book, Sweet Dreams and Terror Cells. I wish I could get Andy and Maleficus to read this chapter. You'd be surprised by some of the content. It is available on Amazon, but someone has to find. I hope you two can find the time to read chapter 2 of that book. Yes, Andy?
Yes, we will certainly look into that. That's I believe it's on Amazon in the UK as well. So I'll be including a link in the post for this show, as I always do, and I urge the audience to get this book. Again, my friend Mike Walsh, he had some news. He's got over 70 books on Amazon, or rather had. Over time, he had different books taken down. And then he got a note last week in which they said they're taking them all down. And he's got books of poetry and books that he's written on fiction. And they've just taken them all down because one book called Europe Arise they didn't like, and I think it's probably just the title they don't like, because you can see all these demonstrations against the lockdowns throughout Europe, so they might look at that and think, oh, that's giving people ideas. So he's had the whole lot taken down, which was his main source of income. So folks, it's happening. You could have got those books from Amazon last week, you can't get them now. So do avail yourself of books while they are available because of what's going on. Frank, back to you.
All of which brings us to the fact that today we see a landmark event, a watershed moment. The event is the Rittenhouse Event. The event began when alien hordes burnt and smashed up the city of Kenosha in their hatred of whites. Next, the white boy Kyle Rittenhouse went to protect his city and community, but did not realize that the alien enemy is murderous. They attacked him, and he killed 3 in his self-defense. But the alien-controlled media portrayed him as a white supremacist, a natural-born killer. Because don't you know, whites are natural killers and oppressors. They say so on TV all the time. Then came the trial and his acquittal. Some days later, a black man with a burning hatred for white people, one Darrell Brooks, took revenge for the crime that an innocent white boy was not offered up as a sacrifice to the alien haters. And this Darrell Brooks drove a vehicle into a Christmas parade of white people, where the magnificence of white people, white culture, and white tradition were on display. A Christmas parade. The media, controlled and peopled by colored aliens, hushed that one up. No national conversation about that. When a colored, especially a black man, harms a white person, the alien-controlled media is slower to move than a hooker from the lap of Hunter Biden. So now you know who has the power, and you know that the whites have no power whatsoever, and occupied people shuffling on the path to their genocide. But why is this a landmark event? In the wake of this event, a critical mass of white people have woken from the sleep and the evil spell that the Jew supremacists have held over them for more than a half century. They have realized that alien supremacists must be holding the power, especially the real power, the media power. They have realized that the aliens as a whole, led by the supremacists and led by black and brown haters such as Joy Reid and Cenk Uyghur, that's the Young Turks man, have formed an alliance, the anti-white alien alliance. They can't help but see it every time they look at their TV screens, every time they look at their videos. And there they are on the screen, spewing their hatred against whites. They have shaken their heads and finally realized that it is their race, their whiteness, that is under attack, and under attack by a regime that dominates them and their countries. Now, a critical mass of the whites, sheep for many decades, see that they face a civil war for their very survival. The low-level civil war of the past decade is on the verge of breaking out into a hot and bloody civil war, and they know it. That's why they're lining up to buy weapons for their protection. So, any comments?
Maleficus, go ahead.
I was going to say, I heard about Darrell Brooks, the driver who went through the Christmas parade. Thankfully, I've only seen one very small bit of footage, which didn't show anything horrific. But I'm aware of the situation. It's interesting. I was listening to a little bit of Operation Scorpio over the weekend, and he made the point that it's strange that these two events were piled on top of each other, and that although the Rittenhouse trial in itself definitely had the outcome which I think, as decent law-abiding citizens, we were all hoping would occur, and that was a man who, essentially, with Rittenhouse, a man who had, because I watched some of the trial footage, and his testimony of essentially walking around offering medical assistance to people that evening did certainly portray him in a very benevolent sort of light, if you like,
and putting out fires, putting out fires,
offering medical assistance, and as I say, I did watch some of the trial footage, and it was some of his testimony was very compelling, I have to say. And again, the fact that Darrell Brooks took it upon himself to do what he did after the trial is another manifestation, essentially, of racial divide being created, whether by design or not. Again, we made a comment. I think it was last week, Andy. I've been a bit poorly, as you can probably hear in my voice, but I think it was last week we made the comment that there was no riots after the Rittenhouse trial. I'd heard actually that the National Guard was showing up to the verdict. This is literally, I only hear very small snippets living over in the UK. Now, the fact that the National Guard were prepared to turn up to the verdict must have known which way that the trial was headed. But we did make the comment last week, did we not, Andy, that there were no riots after the Rittenhouse trial because the trial actually dictated the fact that self-defense with a firearm is an acquittable offense.
Well, it wasn't just that. It's also the fact that even the greatest haters, even the leaders of the BLM movement, realized that there was a public revolt against certainly among the whites, against the destruction when they saw the fires, the 170 cars burnt down to the wheels, the wanton kind of destruction and chaos. There would be a reaction from the grassroots itself. So I didn't expect any riots, and there weren't any. But you watched the trial, right? So did I, actually.
I didn't watch the whole thing. I have to say, I didn't watch the whole thing. I did watch a lot of Rittenhouse's testimony, which I found very emotionally compelling. And I also watched the defense of the chap who had his arm shot, and a few other bits. The cross-examination I thought was
masterly.
Oh, the cross-examination of the guy, the guy who was cross-examining Rittenhouse. I don't know whether it was designed this way, but he seemed incredibly slimy, sly, very. He'd only just started his line of questioning, and he was picked up on it by the judge.
Well, he was a vindictive and very slimy character, and that was again racial. The man wasn't a white. You could see clearly that he wasn't a Caucasian. You could see clearly that there was foreign blood in him, and I think his racial hatred came out in the trial. And by the way, how well do you hear me?
Perfectly, absolutely perfectly. Yeah, he very crystal clear.
You watched part of the trial. I watched the whole trial, all of it, and I enjoyed it. I haven't had so much fun since I devised the video game Curse of the Lesbian Vampire.
This sounds like a great video game. I'm a gamer myself. You'll have to send me a copy.
Well, it'll be followed by a sequel, Revenge of the Mutant Lesbian.
Yeah, and just to let you know, Frank, I've just ordered your book through amazon.co.uk. So that should be arriving soon.
The first chapter is only 4 pages and entertaining, but the second chapter is the part I was talking about.
Well, if I can read this.
We talk about white privilege.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the second chapter, because on amazon.co.uk, the second review down, it says a very exciting and well-paced novel. Well, it's a historical book, but enthralling and intuitive. The perspective of the author on issues of race and his particular view of the white race is unique and experienced. Well worth reading. Chapter 2 is especially inspired, so I will certainly get through both of those before we speak again.
Wonderful. So let's pick up. It's endlessly said on the media by the defenders of Kyle that he cannot be a white supremacist and the killing was not racial because the 3 men that he shot were white. But that is a lie, and I suspect that Tucker Carlson and his colleagues know it. Joseph Rosenbaum, the first man, the man who chased this homicidal maniac who chased Rittenhouse and started the incident, he was a Jew. The man who attacked Rittenhouse with a skateboard, smashing him on the head, and who got shot by Rittenhouse, Anthony Huber, he was a Jew. And it's likely that Gage Grosskreutz, the one who had his arm or his biceps shot off, he was an attacker too, and he attacked with a pistol, by the way. He had a pistol pointed at Rittenhouse, which forced Rittenhouse to fire. Now, it's likely that he is a Jew or half Jew, though that is difficult to establish. The infamous hater of whites, the blabbermouth Joy Reid of MSNBC, actually admitted that they were Jews, and this segment was replayed on Sean Hannity, the Fox News program, on the 19th November. Joy Reid's inarticulate jabber ran, quote, "And Black Lives Matter, and just black people as we just saw," whatever that means. Mr. Huber and Mr. Rosenbaum are white, they're Jewish. They are also victims, and easily make victims, because anyone who supports Black Lives Matter should be very afraid tonight. Unquote. Well, I got lost in the logic there, but that's the kind of garbage that comes out of her mouth. On the Jew supremacist media, and by that I include MSNBC, Jews are always victims. So Joy Reid's going to say victim, and they're victims even when they wantonly chase and attack a white man. And the victim Jews are always allies of the victim blacks, both oppressed by whites, as I've seen many times, what once saw in a very sickening episode of the series, In the Heat of the Night, where the evil whites were mere youths of 18 and 20 years old. You really should see that In the Heat of the Night sometime. Talk about propaganda parading as mind control, parading as entertainment. It was really quite syrupy. And at the end of it, the whites are sentenced for their evilness and their attacks upon the other races, upon a synagogue, upon a black, whatever. And then the blacks go to the synagogue and they talk about the historic and eternal alliance between our peoples. That's supposed to be entertainment. Anyway, many racial groups have erupted in hate in the wake of the Rittenhouse drama. Blacks, the Asian groups, as I said, that Turk, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, the YouTube channel, which I call the Old Turds. And there's hate from Jew supremacists and others, but we shall deal with them one by one. And I'll start by looking at the very people involved in the incident. Now, it's not easy I've already said something about the other two, Rosenbaum and Huber, the two who died, but it's not easy to ascertain whether Gage Grosskreutz is Jewish and therefore non-white, non-Caucasian. Certainly it seems to me that he hates Caucasians in the way that aliens hate Caucasians. For he's an activist with an organization called the People's Revolution, based in Milwaukee. An organization that calls for justice for black and brown people, as seen on its Facebook page. This is a thin veil for the real demand, that black and brown people should be free to commit crimes with impunity, especially against white people. They are successful. It has come to the point that police are now terrified of stopping, arresting, or shooting a black person, even when that person attacks them. The People's Revolution boasts a jewel, a man named Khalil Coleman, Coleman, a black man who has been arrested for providing a juvenile with a Glock handgun to rob a drug house, telling him to, quote, "go get that money," unquote. Khalil Coleman is also affiliated with a gang named Gang Disciples, which refers to itself with the abbreviation GD, and also call themselves Growth and Development, also GD. Now, what kind of gangsters perpetrate such a joke? Well, the website Wisconsin Right Now, in an issue dated late 2020, publishes Chapter 5 of a series exposing the People's Revolution. It mentions that Coleman posted online a certificate of achievement from the Growth and Development Organization. And I had a look at this certificate. It sports a blue Star of David. Now, fancy that. Makes one think. Well, the point is that Gage Grosskreutz is part of an organization that is closely affiliated with a gang that puts a Jewish national symbol on its certificates of pride. I hope that Wisconsin Right Now will investigate this further. I believe this was Chapter 5 of a series they were doing on an expose on the, it's Chapter 5 of a series exposing the People's Revolution. If anyone's interested, they can look up that website, Wisconsin Right Now. Now, these three men are alleged to be Antifa members or Antifa affiliated. What many do not know is that Antifa is largely a Jewish-led organization. So often we see a certain phenomenon. A group of young white men and sometimes women are at a protest which may be somewhat rowdy. They are Antifa. But it's just rowdy, not yet violent. But then someone in their midst leads a charge or sets fire to a car or a building, and the protest turns deadly. That someone might even charge the police. The young whites get caught up in a fight and get in trouble, and at the same time there is death and destruction. Who leads the charge? Who manipulates and escalates a peaceful protest into a violent riot? On 2 occasions that I observed, on live television, I believe, the inciter who led the charge was Jewish. Now, I had some experience with this myself. A couple of years ago, I believe, it was a couple of years ago, I went to a talk at UBC, a talk given by a professor in New Brunswick, actually. What was his name? The name will come to me in a little bit. He runs a website called Euro-Canadian. Now, he was also accompanied by another professor, Mark Hetz. Ricardo Duchesne, that's the name of the professor. Ricardo Duchesne, and his colleague was Mark Hetz. And they were giving a talk on how whites were being deprived of freedom of speech to even say that they're being dispossessed. And I was invited to that talk. And I actually spoke at it in reply to some of the hecklers. And there was a problem getting into the talk. I couldn't even get in at first because of the Antifa. All these very rowdy looking, some of them tall, tough people with masks that looked to me like gorilla masks. And they blocked the entranceway completely and shouted and yelled and held up slogans, but they wouldn't let us get in. They wouldn't let the talk proceed. Now, we did finally get in. And unfortunately, there was a stink in the hall because the Antifa had left some human waste there, some feces there, which had to be taken out, but the stink was still there. And that's the kind of tactics of Antifa. Now, at the end of the talk, we came out, and there was the Antifa still there. But I hung around with a few others to see what happened, and the Antifa took off their masks. And their leader, it turned out, was a 56-year-old man with whitish hair. He was telling them that we all leave together, we don't separate, we all leave together. And this 56-year-old man lived in a town called Ladner, south of Vancouver. And some of the people who were at the talk did some research, identified him as Jewish. Now, Antifa may consist partly of young whites, spoiled brats of rich family. But it is led, I believe, it's my opinion, I may be wrong, but it's my opinion, by Jews, some of whom are pathological haters, some troublemakers, and some are Jew supremacists in the making. Kind of reminds you of the countercultural revolution of the 1960s. You know, the hippies, the counterculture, the drug taking, the acid trips, the marijuana puffing, the we don't have to work, you can only work just a few days a week, love everybody. That was a giant step in the process of destroying America and Canada, and also to some extent Europe. But who led it? Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, Mark Rudd. I believe that all of these are Jews. And the Students for Democratic Society, the SDS, which was largely Jewish. Years and decades go by, but there is always a section of the Jewish community that is pathologically insurrectionist and hostile to the whites, perhaps hostile to anyone that gives them a home. Maybe they did that back in the Middle East 4,000 years ago. I don't know. But certainly in modern times, there's always a section of the Jewish community that is hostile to the whites that gave them a home. Now, most of the Jewish community are peaceful people, some very talented who mind their own business. So we are not talking about the community as a whole or the race as a whole. But then there is a sizable section that is filled with an instinctive, almost biological resentment and hatred of the whites that they live among. And it shows in their speech, their writing, their scoffing and demeaning of all that is white. And inside this section dwells a subsection, a small segment, that constitutes the supremacists. Comments?
Yes, I think it's. I mean, again, let's. I've got an example here, and it's worth throwing in just to give and folks, you'll know this if you listen regularly. Noel Ignatieff quotes. You can go to azquotes.com. That's where I'm getting this from. The goal of abolishing the white race is on its face so desirable that some may find it hard to believe that it could incur any opposition other than from committed white supremacists. Keep bashing the dead white males and the live ones and the females too, until the social construct known as the white race is destroyed, not deconstructed but destroyed. And then another one. This is a professor, by the way, in the UK. He's dead now. If you are a white male, you don't deserve to live. You are a cancer. You are a disease. White males have never contributed anything positive to the world. Now, if you were to replace the word white male with another race and say something like that in the UK, then you would be prosecuted, and certainly if you were to do that in America, then you would certainly be cancel cultured. But
I
no
missed the
action's
name
taken.
of the professor. I missed the name of the professor, Andy.
It's Professor Noel Ignatieff.
No, the one in the UK.
No, it's the same one. I was just saying, if you were to say that in the UK.
Oh,
okay.
Sorry.
If you were to say something like that in the UK, but not about a white male, but about something else, saying you don't deserve to live, you are a cancer, you're a disease, you've never contributed anything positive to the world, they'd be running around hate speech. But it's interesting how this guy says something like this, and it's up on AZ Quotes. There's no, complaints or anything. It's astonishing, really.
Indeed.
Oh, and another one. The key to solving the social problems of our age is to abolish the white race. Well, how can you abolish something without destroying it? And
well, there's also Susan Sontag, who said that the white race is the cancer of history.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as I say, these supremacists are a tiny fragment of the entire Jewish community, and we have to recognize that the community as a whole is peaceful, talented, and a positive force. We have to watch out for that section which filled with this very innate and visceral hate for the whites who've given them, who act as their hosts. Anyway, I'll continue. You should view a YouTube video titled, the title is "Father of Man Killed by Rittenhouse Slams Marjorie Taylor Greene for Attacking Son's Character." Now, the son is Anthony Huber, and this is his father. It's an interview on the supremacist TV channel MSNBC, where the black Joy Reid joins with the Jew, Anthony Huber's father, in an assault on whites. The alien anti-white alliance spews its venom. Huber's father says, "What did the police think would happen with this little kid out on the street with an AR-15? Nobody questioned him because he was on their side, because he picked their side. Little white kid with an AR-15, oh, he's on our side. We don't have to question him. As a matter of fact, we'll coordinate with him. Give him a water bottle and say, 'Good job, kid, now go home.'" Now you look at that little spiel, little white kid. Now, I thought we were told that races don't exist. And here they are. But Huber's father says the white police and the white boy are on the same side, the white side. Now, no Chinese man would say little Chinese kid with an AR-15. He'd just say little kid with an AR-15. Similarly, a white man will say about another white kid, little kid with an AR-15. No white man would say little white kid is immune from the white police. Only an alien would say that. This man, Huber, may have come from a family that has lived for generations in America, but he still thinks of whites as enemy foreigners. His speech reveals it. Similarly, Gage Grosskreutz has brought a lawsuit in the hope of money, $10 million worth of money, that alleges that the police deputized, quote, a band of white nationalist vigilantes, unquote. Again, a white person would say only a band of vigilantes. Only an alien would feel the need to add white nationalist. And what kind of alien would say it? One who feels that white nationalists are an obstacle to his desire to obliterate the white race, to people the white countries with non-whites so that they disappear, so the whites disappear. That's the kind of person who would say that. And that's what he said in his lawsuit, a band of white nationalist vigilantes. And that makes me wonder if Grosskreutz thinks of himself as an alien, not a white. Among the talkers appearing on the news after the Rittenhouse verdict, spitting fire and venom, was a woman named Joyce Vance, captioned as MSNBC legal analyst. You can hear her verbiage in the YouTube video, debunking MSNBC's lies about the Rittenhouse verdict. Now, she's appeared several times, but this video excerpts some of these people and excerpts Joyce Vance. Joyce Vance actually said that Rittenhouse's legal argument that he was defending himself was fallacious, insofar as he created the hostile situation. She specified, Rittenhouse's argument makes as much sense as a bank robber shooting a bank guard who tried to apprehend him, and then claiming that he was in the legal right since he was acting in self-defense. Well, believe it or not, Joyce Vance actually said this. I kid you not. And this is a lawyer, a former US attorney who was appointed to that post by Barack Obama. Joyce Vance is Jewish. Funny how these aliens all act in unison against whites. Now, here's what I want to ask you, Andy, and ask you, Maleficus. Did Rittenhouse create the situation, or did the rioters and the arsonists? Did the arsonists force whites to come and protect the city and the property?
That's that in itself.
No, one more question. Did Rittenhouse create the hostile situation, or did Rosenbaum, by chasing after a young boy with threats and imprecations? Clearly, an unarmed man who chases an armed man is a homicidal lunatic. Now, what do you make of it, Andy Maleficus? What do you make of the comments of Joyce Vance?
Well, Joyce Vance, obviously, she has already, rather like the stories that we got on 9/11, the very day of 9/11, and people in the audience were giving the exact description of what happened to the floors in those two buildings. That wasn't to come out for another year and a half, 2 years in the actual report. So obviously the narrative was there, and the seeds of the narrative were there of how they wanted to direct the public opinion. Now, whether Rittenhouse, the whole, as far as I can see from an outsider's point of view from the UK, the contention of Rittenhouse actually being out on the street with his AR-15 as opposed to protecting property. Some of the early footage is of Rittenhouse and a group of people protecting one of the car lots. And there's a whole load of BLM protesters going past saying, protect your property, not the street. Now, this seemed to be a mantra throughout the protesters, and who came up with that? That's an interesting concept in itself, protect your property, not the street. And I just want to go back to a video that I watched quite a while back now, from just after all the BLM riots occurring, and it was with the economist Catherine Austin Fitts, and she said if you look at where these BLM riots occurred, and where all these pallets of bricks were being placed on street corners conveniently for people to use. Some of it was the most expensive real estate in the areas, and you could have almost predicted beforehand where these riots would have occurred, just based on the price of the real estate that was damaged at the time. Now, also, I want to pick you up on something else that was said. You said a little while back about a white vigilante group, and this is another narrative that's been pushed. Now, what is Antifa if it is not a vigilante group? In the same sort of ilk, if you like, or maybe not even the same sort of ilk, but maybe so. These are two flip sides of the same coin in some respects. I've been on the receiving end of Antifa breaking up meetings, attacking meetings, and largely, as I said a few weeks back to Andy, most of Antifa's recruiting ground is, in actual fact, college campuses, where people are impressionable, and they're essentially, we know that a lot of these college and university campuses and colleges and universities themselves are very, I believe Paul English calls them Marxist. I'm not going to use the language Paul Paul English uses, actually, but they are centers of Marxism, let's put it that way. And so the fact that Antifa and probably BLM are recruited from such places, I mean, what I find interesting about the BLM movement as well is that a lot of the contributors to BLM are white. They are a lot of the people who financially contribute to BLM are white. Now, I am also under the impression that very little, if any at all, of the financial gains that BLM as an organization got went towards any black causes. As far as I'm aware, they went towards political causes. So the fact that they're saying, white vigilante group, they're talking about this little white boy on the street with a gun. Now, going back to where I originally started, which is the main contention that I see in all this is that Rittenhouse was actually on the streets, wandering around with an assault rifle. And sure, he could well have been administering, first aid to people. But it does, to me, having grown up in the UK where we had Dunblane, which banned all our guns, and before that we had another massacre. I can't remember the name of it. Andy will probably remind me of that one in a minute. We live in a society over here where owning a gun is positively frowned upon, and to be wandering around. This is where I think that the mainstream narrative have got their narrative from, is the fact that he wasn't protecting property. He was wandering around on the streets, and there seemed to be, I don't know whether you can put this into context for me, Frank, but there seemed to be a well-rehearsed statement from all the protesters saying, protect your property, not the street, i.e. the streets are ours, and you're to protect the property that you're stood on.
Well, I will address that. Just let me say one last thing about Joy Vance, and I will address that immediately, okay?
Okay.
And now, later, Joy Vance, the former U.S. attorney, or rather the anti-U.S. attorney, appeared on TV again to say that the laws must be changed. This was a miscarriage of justice. It happened because of the laws that allow whites to defend themselves, basically. Stand your ground. You can carry a gun. You can defend yourself. Those laws have to be changed. So this can't happen again. The next time the white boy will be found guilty. She nodded her face solemnly, her eyes dark with menace and deep intent. Yes, we will change the laws. My interpretation of it, we will change the laws so that aliens can attack whites and the whites will not have the legal right to defend themselves. We lost the battle, but we alien supremacists play a long game and we shall win this war. So that's what's coming up now. They're going to change the laws to make sure that whites can't defend themselves. And that's a critical matter that needs discussion in the next time we do a show. The whole issue of whites acting on an individual basis, on a volunteer basis as a community, but not depending on the government, because the government is in the hands of the alien enemy. And they want that. They want that you can't defend yourselves. We have the government, but we can't, and therefore you can't come to the government for justice normally. But you can, of course, organize, and whites are very good at individual action, volunteer action. They've got to stop that. They've got to stop that volunteerism. You know, a white volunteers to go to Africa to build schools for the benighted people there. But then he can also volunteer without pay to protect his community, and we can't have that. Now, I'll address your point about property. Very interesting point, because the one word that you'll hear the most in this whole thing is property, over and over. It was well orchestrated on the street, protect your property, but then they did attack that property. And during the trial, Binger, over and over, made the point, examining various witnesses, he said, in a very threatening way, so you do realize that you can use a gun or violence to protect yourself, but you can't use a gun to protect property. You do understand that, and many of the people the whites question, had to nod their heads and say yes. So what did you intend to do if someone did come to burn more vehicles or smash the buildings? Did you intend to use your gun? And the whites had to say, well, no, we were going to just deter them by the fact that we had guns. We weren't going to use them. But Binger, in his questioning, he implied and made it clear over and over, especially when he examined a man called Nick Smith. He suggested that it is not right to protect a building with a gun. Now, property has come up over and over on the mainstream media, the occupation media, that whites, that their black people actually died. It wasn't, they didn't, it was not just property that was destroyed, it was lives that was destroyed. You get the idea that property is worth nothing. And of course, whatever the mainstream media says trickles down to the people. There's the college where Rittenhouse is studying online. And of course, the student group there is brainwashed and lefty or colored or whatever. Even the whites are brainwashed at these universities. The student group, a student group, wants him expelled. And they've made up a petition to that effect that he should be expelled because he's a dangerous white supremacist and so forth. But one of the things they wrote in their petition was, I quote, "He values property over people," quote unquote. He values property over people. So why is this all being said? You know, well, I'll come to that in a minute, why it's being said. But take that to its conclusion. Do you oppose the French Revolution because the workers wanted property? The rich people had the property, they had the houses and the food. And the workers wanted that property. So do you oppose the French Revolution because the workers wanted more property? The proletariat wanted more property? Bank guards shoot bank robbers. Why? Because the bank robber is making off with property. So you say he shouldn't. So obviously the property is vital. It's important. Now, these people looted a lot of property. In one car lot, I believe, they burned 175 cars. So that's just a small portion of the devastation they wreaked all over the city in Kenosha. Last summer, in Minnesota, which was the capital of that, I'm trying to remember the name of the city where George Floyd was the riots on the George Floyd matter, they destroyed huge amounts of property. Now, the idea is that they're trying to sort of establish the right that anti-whites, especially coloreds and black people who are rioting, and generally speaking, they can destroy white property. They can destroy cities. They can destroy houses. They can destroy vehicles. They might even destroy a bridge one day. They're that destructive. But white people will rebuild them. They are the eternal suckers. They are the eternal altruists. They are the ones who always want to fix things and make it better for everyone. So we are going to keep burning down your property, and you sucker whites will always rebuild it for us. And we'll curse you and call you supremacist. We'll call you destructive. We'll call you cruel. We'll call you privileged. And all the time we'll laugh at the fact that you will rebuild this stuff for us. Okay? That you are far from being supremacist, you're actually so altruistic that you'll rebuild this stuff. You could see that in the riots at Toledo, Ohio, many years ago, like 10, 15 years ago. Some blacks, they raped a number of white women. A number, and it wasn't just one, it was becoming a bit of an epidemic. And the whites began to finally wake up and get angry. And some of them invited a group called the National Socialist Movement, I believe. Some white nationalist group came down. And the blacks rioted. And they not only burned down several neighborhoods, they burned down their own neighborhoods. Now, how does that further your cause? But they were happy to burn them down because they knew stupid whitey, poor whitey, will rebuild it. If he doesn't do it with his own hands, he will do it with taxes that the government will extort from whitey with a gun. The government will extort whitey, and and that money will go to rebuild those towns at the expense of whitey. That's why property is coming up so much. The whitey will always clean up. In Minnesota, they burned down the city, and then they destroyed and trashed and put graffiti on every wall. And then guess what? This was actually a snippet on the Tucker Carlson show video. White women came out to clean up the city. And they were cleaning up the city, sweeping up the trash, and so forth. And they were cleaning graffiti. And a black woman called out, "That's you're cleaning up a BLM slogan on that wall. Great way to use your white privilege," she yelled. But the point is that the blacks volunteer, all right. They volunteer to burn down cities when things get hot. But whites volunteer to clean them up, just like whites volunteer to save the lions of Africa, or whites volunteer to set up AIDS clinics in Congo and Ghana. Now, that was also seen in this incident. A group of volunteer whites came to Kenosha to protect businesses, and the business they protected, in this case, where Kyle Rittenhouse was concerned, was one owned by two East Indians who betrayed them. But these two East Indians wanted help. And these people came from other towns, mainly, to help. And there was one Joanne Fiedler who came. She had a pistol to protect herself, a revolver, I believe. And they asked her, why did you? She said, because someone had to step up. And we wanted to do things like repair damage, protect property, protect people, give medical aid, and do cleanup. Now, you won't hear Cenk Uygur doing cleanup. You won't hear Reza Aslan, who has spouted anti-white hatred in the past. That was in the Covington case of Nicholas Sandmann. He's not going to do cleanup. Neither is anyone from his community going to volunteer to do cleanup. They haven't done so yet. So to answer your question, there is a big push to say property is worthless. We can just destroy it anytime, and you don't have the right to protect it. And soon, whites will be told they don't have the right to protect their own homes, their only property, you know. And after all, if we destroy public property or a whole community, stupid whitey will rebuild it, no problem. If they had to pay for it out of their own pockets, they wouldn't say this. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think pretty concisely, actually. It's yeah. Thank you for that clarification. That's yeah, an interesting one. And of course, as you say, with the whitey being the one to go and clear up the clear up all the graffiti and sweep the streets, etc., etc. Yet you still have President Joe Biden coming forward and saying that white supremacy is the largest threat to America in this time. Not Al Qaeda, not any of these foreign warlords, but white supremacy is the biggest threat to America in our day and age, according to Joe Biden.
Yes, and I just want to jump in here because there was a couple of things I wanted to mention. The use of a skateboard. This is a typical tactic. I've actually seen this before during my time in the police, where there was, a taxi driver, and he said he kept a great big, those metal mag-light torches, one of the really big ones, and he kept that in the sort of inside of his door. And he said, of course, that's in case I break down at night and I need to look at the engine, And of course, we know what it was there for. But if that was a baseball bat, then that could be regarded as an offensive weapon and a prosecutable offence. But when you've got reasonable excuse for having something like that could be used to defend yourself, because you would use it to look in your engine at night. So the use of skateboards is exactly what they're using those for, because if you're clobbered round the head with a skateboard, it's going to do a lot of damage. And I believe that Kyle Rittenhouse was attacked with a skateboard. And the other comment
he was by Anthony Huber.
Yeah, there you go.
And he shot Anthony Huber. Now, I would refer you to a Mark Dice video. It's a recent video on his channel, Mark Dice, D-I-C-E. And he mentions an instance where recently a person was killed with a skateboard.
That is interesting. I'll have to look at that. And the other point is the Joseph Rosenbaum. I want to read this. This is, you don't get him coming up on Wiki, but this is an interesting page. I might actually put this in our show post, because I looked him up on Wiki and it's come up with a page, reallifevillains.mirrorhees.org/wiki/Joseph Rosenbaum. And it says criminal and medical history. Rosenbaum was convicted in 2002 of committing an act of sexual misconduct with a minor under the age of 15 on at least 2 occasions and of interfering with a monitor device. He served 12.5 years in prison, during which he was disciplined for multiple violent acts. These included manufacturing a weapon, sex acts, multiple assaults and arson. In total, he received 42 disciplines while in prison. He was released in 2016. Rosenbaum was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, having been in the mental hospital for a suicide attempt, and was on antidepressants at the time of his death. Rosenbaum's sex offenders registry entry shows that he was designated to be at high risk of reoffending. Shortly before his death, Rosenbaum had charges filed against him for domestic abuse and battery. They were filed just a month prior to his death in August 2020 while participating in a riot. Well, Maleficus, was it we played that Candace Owens clip recently about his history of pedophilia? I think there were 5 counts.
Yeah. He raped young children.
Yeah, between the ages of 9 and 12. I think there were 5 of them. So I don't understand why that guy wasn't in prison for life on that alone. Okay? None of this was talked about in the mainstream media, because of course they want to portray these are the sort of people that they will get behind. They will say that this guy is better than Kyle, and they won't bring out his history or anything like that, because they know people will just say, well, even if this guy shouldn't be around anyway, quite frankly, with what he's been doing to people. And it's astonishing how he can commit that amount of paedophile rapes and not get a life sentence. But just to let you know, we've done the hour. Do you want to carry on, or do you want to save the rest while we fit it into another show?
We'll save the rest for another show. There's a lot There's a lot of important stuff, and we'll save it for the next show. I'll just give you a closing then. Is that okay?
Yeah, you close it out, and then we'll close out the show.
Yeah, so we spoke about only one group, one racial group's hatred and anger so far. I was going to go on to the blacks, to the Africans who have been all over the television screens and the internet. They've been, they've been spouting a most vicious and hateful gibbering with an all-consuming anger driving it. They kind of remind me of these slum women in third world countries slum people, but mainly women, who have this terrible gibbering, which is so aggressive, with their eyes flashing and the bile spewing out. And that's what I see on these panels that appeared on various TV channels. But then you would say, so what? I mean, that's going to happen. After every crisis, or even without a crisis, that's going to happen. It's as inevitable as gas after a McDonald's cheeseburger. In fact, of course, what of it? Yeah, as I said, that's inevitable as gas after a McDonald's cheeseburger, right? But then I might say it's as inevitable as gas during a meeting with Joe Biden, especially if you're a royal.
Yeah, exactly. It was supposed to be Prince Charles's wife Camilla, wasn't it, that he did that in front of?
Yes.
While campaigning against methane emissions, I believe. Yeah.
Maleficus, you're a wit. So, you might say, what's the significance of it? It's just inevitable. There is a lot of significance, okay? There's a lot of significance. There's Joy Reid, who I've mentioned many times, because she has such a big following. Her parents came from, she was not the descendant of slaves. Her father and mother came from different African countries, and they came voluntarily. They came because America is a white country. They didn't go to Japan, they didn't go to the Middle East, they didn't go to another African country. They could have gone to 50 African countries, but no, they came to a white country. And instead of bumming around in some thatched hut or some village of kraals, Joy Reid now lives no doubt in a palace, given the princely salary or the princessly salary that MSNBC gives her. Instead of bumping and jolting on lousy roads ridden with potholes and rutted, she travels on the beautiful superhighways of a white country, and she flies around frequently on airplanes and she couldn't have had that life in an African country. And yet, with all that, she has this burning hatred against whites. It's not against slavery, it's about character. And whites will have to realize that there is something in the character of many colored races that hates anyone better, that hates anyone who benefits them, and above all, hates the nobility of whites. Now, that nobility is something we can talk about in another episode. These haters say the white is evil, but they support the burning and destruction because they know, like the burning and destruction of last summer, because they know that the evil white person will rebuild it, as he did in Toledo, Ohio. But if the white is evil, why would he rebuild it? So these Africans know that the white is not evil. He's an altruistic, kindly sucker. So they feel free to burn, free to destroy. So if the white is not evil, why do they hate the white man and the white woman? It's because of their beauty and nobility, and that will always remain. That will not change. And the only way they can change it is to destroy the white, completely exterminate them. And then that feeling of envy would go. You see, this is a racial struggle, and whites are struggling for their very existence. So people should not be taken in by the deceptive words, the evasions, the the neutral terms used. Like there's a man called Steve Turley who runs a channel, Dr. Steve Turley, he runs a channel in which he won't say they're after whites or it's other races hate the whites, or he'll say they're Marxists and they're trying to build a communist utopia. So when there's a racial episode like this black man killing these white people at a parade, at a Christmas parade, he'll say they are thinking they're going to achieve their Marxist utopia. He'll avoid saying it's our race that's under attack. It is not a matter of Democrat and Republican, not a matter in the UK of Conservative and Labour Party. It's not a matter of socialism and communism or Marxism. All these are blinds. This is a racial struggle over land and the very existence of white people. From time immemorial, tribes and nations and races have fought for land. Land, which is the very means of life, land from which you draw your very food and water, land without which you cannot live. And the most prized land is fertile and resource-rich land. Today, that same struggle is being fought for the land of white people, for Britain, for Sweden. They are taking this land and they're taking it without a fight. And this is realized, actually, after the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. There was an MSNBC discussion panel featuring 6 persons on the panel. I believe it was 3 p.m. Eastern time, the day of the verdict. And there was a black woman bubbling and bursting with hate. Her name is Brittany Packnett Cunningham, and she, in her emotion, admitted the truth. These white people who came out with their guns as volunteers, active, she called them vigilantes. These white people who came out with their guns to protect property. And this white jury, this jury of white people who acquitted Kyle Rittenhouse and set him free, they are giving a message to us that white, and now this is quotation marks, quote, they're giving a message that white people will not give up the country without a fight, unquote. White people will not give up the country. This woman, in her emotion, admitted the truth, that it's about taking the country from white people. So the eternal struggle for land, and in this case for the civilization that the whites have built, the enviable civilizations, the superhighways, and all the luxuries, all the technology, they are fighting for the land and the civilization. It is the struggle of millennia which is being fought again, but this time it's being fought with different weapons. The supremacists have emasculated white people and neutralized them by mind control. And they've changed the laws, they've evaporated the borders, they have indoctrinated white people, white women to not have babies. With feminism, they have indoctrinated white women to not have babies, so they will not reproduce their race. They have indoctrinated white people to feel inferior to the colored alien, to make them want to worship and serve the colored alien. It's the same old battle, except that this time the supremacists have been the 5th column within the country. They've opened the borders, they've passed immigration laws, and now these countries are being colonized just as surely as once upon a time the German tribe, a tribe from Scandinavia might colonize France. It's the same thing, and this time it is a fight for survival, because at the end of this process there will be no white people left. The race will perish. So stick to that. It is a racial struggle for your very existence. It's a struggle for the land. And do not be fooled by talk of Marxists and Marxism and the left and the right. These are words that are meant to blind your to the fact that they hate your race and they want the land of your race. That is my message, my closing message here. I hope it makes sense, Maleficus and Andrew.
Thank you, Frank. It certainly does. And Maleficus, any final comments and then we'll close it out?
Oh, no, a pleasure as always, Frank. And you do speak an awful lot of sense and concisely so. So yeah, no, absolute pleasure to speak to you again. And I look forward to the next instalment of this.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much, Frank. And folks, just quickly to let you know that next week we'll be going out Malefica Smile on Tuesday, because I've got another show on Monday. And yeah, well, I'm not quite sure. Peter Hammond, I think, won't be on this week. We'll be putting him on next Monday, but so you'll still get our show, but it'll be on the Tuesday. Peter will be on the Monday, might be on the Thursday as well. It's all a bit up in the air at the moment, but it's really the most important announcement is just to let you know that we will be doing a show, Maleficus and I, next week, but it'll be going out Tuesday instead of Monday, and then it'll return to Monday. All will be revealed next Monday, and that will be when you get told why. So I want to thank Frank so much for his excellent research into the show that he broadcast for us today, the Rittenhouse Event, Malevolent Hatred Against the White Soul and White Character. I want to thank Maleficus for joining us also. I want to thank all of you for listening. I will of course be back with you all tomorrow, and until then folks, have a wonderful day, and bye for now.